and oppression are worlds apart from each other.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, I didn't need any ending to it. I mean, you've obviously agreed that that was a very thought-provoking, very challenging discussion, and clearly it had generated, obviously, many questions. I am not going to take up time or discussing or asking questions. I'll leave it to you. The floor is now open. Thank you, Bishop Cullen.
Well, if I answer the question that way, let me just say what I think is the issue we've got to grapple with in terms of the future. Because I think that if what one is saying about prophets, that if you respond to God, it can go one way. If you don't respond to God, it can go another way. I think the challenge that we're being faced with as Christians, Muslims, Jews, of all religious faith communities, is how do we create a world in which people start to behave as human beings to each other? How do we live in a world, I mean, we speak of Christ as the Prince of Peace. There is Richard Dawkins, this famous geneticist who's now become a militant atheist, has written this book, The God Delusion. And it's very easy to write that off, but he's making some very important points. He's actually saying, I would like to see the end of all religion, because religion has been responsible for so much violence and cruelty in our world. Now, that's an indictment on all of us. And I think insofar as it is, one of the things that we should be grappling with is how do we so learn to reach across to each other that we can pick up what I would call human values. And those human values are there in our culture, they're there in our faith, they're there in our Bibles. But it seems to me that we only find that when we begin not to look at where we differ in our understandings, but when we begin to reach out, as I think we are doing tonight, as human beings, one with another, coming from very different angles, and yet we can laugh and smile and share together and learn from one another. Now, that's got to be the world we're moving in. So it doesn't seem to me it's a question of when did Muslims create violence like that. The problem is that we all are capable of it, and we all have a history of it. And what we need to do is to say, well, that's the challenge. How do we actually move into another future? And maybe we can save the world in a strange way. Does it have to be a catastrophe that says the end of the world is coming? I think one needs a much more crisis. God, our biblical tradition, which is common to both of us, I think, arising from Abraham, is that God is a God of history. And that means God is working his purpose out in history. Does that mean, therefore, that if history has to end in an utter disaster, has God been God? Has Lord been Lord? And I think that when his people respond to him, then God can work his purpose out. And we can pray for the kingdom of God, the sovereignty of God, to come into this world. That's the challenge I think we're facing. No. Because I think that our understanding is that when Christ returns again, he will return in glory. And that will wind all things up and bring to completion all things. See, I think that the understanding of Christ ruling in history is this thing that comes out of what we call the millennium teaching. But I think Christ is already ruling in history if we will only listen to him and obey him. The scriptures talk about Christ reigning until he had put all his enemies under his feet, and then he hands over the authority to God. So I don't see Christ. It does not say when he comes again he will come to walk among us. It says he will come in glory and wonder. So I think that may be a difference that we have in our understandings.
The Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, said that when Jesus returns, alayhi salam, apart from ruling the world with justice, that he would share money, not South African rands, and most certainly not the US dollar. The money would be the original money created by God, the dinar and dirham, meaning the gold and silver coins. But that's another story. He said he would get married. I don't think it'll be a South African girl. He said that he'd get married. He said that he would have children. He would live for 40 years. Then he would die. And he would then, when he dies, you would pray over his body. And he would then be buried next to me. After giving that lecture, I got an email. Sheikh Imran, where did you get that information that Jesus is going to be buried next to you? The Prophet is buried, alayhi salatu wasalam, in Medina. And so here's a prophecy, concrete, flesh and blood, concrete prophecy. That when he returns, he's going to return in person, in flesh and blood, because he's going to get married, he'll have children, and he would die, and he'd be buried in Medina. I just wanted to end that into the record.
Like I said at the very beginning of this thing, it's a big subject and there's a lot of complex issues. And one of them is the movement from what was called prophecy to apocalyptic. Now, the difference between the prophets, one was a sequence following the other, but where the prophets spoke of this world and tended to be very optimistic about God's purposes in this world, the apocalyptic person had despaired of this world. And it's amazing how much of our imagery about the end of the world comes from apocalyptic writing, which means it's focusing very much on the bad things, the negatives, the anti-Christ, you see, the things that are wrong. I think that, that righteousness and goodness and truth is the thing that is dominant in certainly the New Testament. Three things abide: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Now, if one lives in a world in which what we call the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, goodness, peace, gentleness, kindness, patience, faithfulness, meekness, self-control, as against the 7 deadly sins of greed and covetousness and anger and all the others, lust. You see, the righteousness comes when we walk God's way. And it seems to me that the real focus, certainly from a Christian point of view, is one of so being open to God that He fills you with His Spirit so that you can walk in His way. It's not trying to live a good life. It's letting God be the one to whom you're open, in which you're seeking to obey Him, seeking to walk His way. If I understand Islam rightly, it's the whole conquest of the self. And I think that is right. You cannot deal with the external enemy unless you've dealt with the real enemy, which is the one on the inside. And I think that, therefore, righteousness is, when we're focusing on things of righteousness, we do better to look at those things, goodness, truth, love, and so on, rather than always be focusing on the negative. And the problem we have with this debate, really, is it tends to be the focus on what's going wrong rather than what's going right. I use up all the time. I'm so sorry.
No, I have 4 minutes as well.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I just love that last part of the answer. We still have Christian mystics around in the world today. But I love the question even more. When the poor are permanently poor and the rich are permanently rich, that's not righteousness.
No.
That's oppression. And that oppression is around the world today. If you have a black African woman working in your home as a domestic servant, and you pay her a wage that no one in your social circle will ever work for, you pay her the wage of a dog.